Hey listeners, we're back from our super short spring break and we're ready to bring you spookier, scarier, and even more sinister stories than ever before. And if you're here because you love stories, true stories, head over to screamingpods.com and enjoy The Armchair Philosopher. Their latest episode shares stories from the LGBTQ community and the impact of embracing who they are. It really is a fantastic episode and a great show with an important message for our generation. Again, you can find this podcast and more at screamingpods.com. Now, enjoy the show.
You're listening to the Screaming Pods Network.
So, Jill, I know you kind of spend a lot of time in the woods.
I do.
I don't mean that in a weird, pejorative way or anything.
No, so I love hiking. I love being in the woods. I even have a lot of opportunities with my day job to spend some time out in nature.
So, what are some things that you would absolutely not want to encounter while out on the trails?
Well, one of the scariest nights that I've experienced, and it wasn't really like scary, it was just eerie. We went on the trails for a moonlit snowshoe in the winter, and I just kept thinking, man, this is my first time in snowshoes. If a bear or if like a coyote or something came out, I couldn't run away from it. I would literally fall down and be their next meal. I wouldn't know what to do.
And the time it would take you to unstrap those things from your feet.
I didn't know how to strap them
out.
or unstrap them. A coworker had to help me because that was my first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes it's even scary to run into other people on the trail because you just don't know what other people are doing out there. So I'd never want to like stumble upon somebody doing something nefarious.
Yeah, people are definitely scary. And the seclusion of the woods, what you're able to get away with out there.
All the time I wonder, when am I going to find a dead body in these woods? All the time.
Because it happens.
You can't see everything that's going on in them.
Things can hide out there. Things can be undiscovered. Like Bigfoot.
Sasquatch. Skunk ape.
What's the other word? There's like a
Yeti.
really weird one. Skookums.
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 Oh, that makes me want to boop it on the nose.
Call them. Oh, you skookum.
Oh, sweet little skookums. But yeah, definitely wouldn't want to run into a Bigfoot. I don't know what they're capable of. I don't know if they're friendly. I mean, I've seen Harry and the Hendersons.
It's just not a documentary.
It's not a documentary. It's more of a best case scenario. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Jill.
And my name is Ben.
And you're at the fire. And tonight we do have a very special guest on with us. And you guessed it, we're talking about Bigfoot. Bigfoot research and firsthand accounts. Tonight we have Don Biggyfoot Neal on at the fire. He's going to share a couple of stories about his experiences with Bigfoot.
That's right. Don is a lead investigator and researcher for the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization, or KBRO. Or as I like to call it, K-Bro. Mr. Neal is a licensed and ordained minister and pastor, going on 46 years, an honorary Kentucky colonel in good standing, and during the presidency of George W. Bush, Mr. Neal received from then Secretary of State Colin Powell the Presidential Flag and Wings lapel pin for being an ambassador of goodwill for the state of Kentucky. Don has interviewed over 100 witnesses who have either seen or heard a possible Bigfoot. Mr. Neal is a speaker and offers Bigfoot presentations to local libraries, high schools, colleges, and many other forums.
And his name is Biggyfoot, so he's a pretty cool guy.
He's a super cool guy. It was really awesome talking to him.
And like I said, he's going to be sharing some of the most intense firsthand accounts that we've ever heard involving this cryptid creature.
Here's Don.
I have never seen a Bigfoot myself. I'm living for that day. I'm living for that moment. I want it to happen, and it's going to happen because I'm out in the field so much, the odds are increased. So people say, well, why do you believe? And I believe in a Bigfoot. Not only I have found footprints, I have found the hair samples. I have found their scat left behind. When I go to follow up on Bigfoot reports, we have found scat that we sent off to universities and came back. This is amazing. Unknown hominid. And then they want to know, what did you send me? We have this database. We have all these creatures. You know, they're proud to figure out what it is and tell you what it is. Then they get a specimen. They cannot figure it out. So they say, what is this you sent us? We can't find this in our database. And we're very interested. And they'll send 2 or 3 certified letters. And then all of a sudden you finally go, well, you just write Bigfoot. And the letters stop coming. They don't want anything else to do with it. In Bigfoot, 90% because of the witnesses that I have talked to. When people cry, when people start shedding tears, when full-grown men begin to shake, and you see them wring their hands, you see them stutter, you see them having difficulty relating the story to you man to man, these people aren't playing. They're not lying. They're certainly not going to make themselves look like the fool. They're just telling you the truth, and they're being honest of how they reacted when they saw something that's not believable step out and become reality right in front of their eyes. And I've been speaking to 2 witnesses just this evening before you came on. 2 witnesses I'm going to have to do some follow-ups on it, had possible sightings right within 10 miles of my home. After we're done talking, I'm probably going to go out for a few hours tonight because it's got my fever up. I'm a full-time, part-time researcher for a group called the KBRO. That's the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization. And they're just like the BFRO. That's the big ones that have the TV show. And I was going to join that group, but I couldn't travel to many different states. Being a minister, I have to be here at home as close as I can. So the KBRO deals only in Kentucky with sightings in Kentucky, and it more fit my agenda. And I joined them in 2007, and it keeps me full-time busy constantly all the time. So I've spoke to over 100 witnesses, and from the oldest to the youngest, I always tell people this, from the most intelligent people with PhDs I have talked to that have seen Bigfoot, to people that can't spell their own name, people that had a 4th grade education and literally had to quit working here in eastern Kentucky and eastern Tennessee and went to work in the 4th or 5th grade, had to quit to help their families, some of the old timers that literally didn't finish school. I spoke to people that were rich and had plenty. I've spoke to people that the old country saying is they didn't have a pot or a window. I'm sorry, I'm pretty country, and I come up with those every once in a while, and that means poor here in Kentucky. I've spoke to people at every education level, and they have the story of Bigfoot, and it relates almost exactly. And I've always said, if there's not a Bigfoot, some major scientific team or medical team is missing a great opportunity to study one of the greatest mass hallucinations ever been in history. Because these people of every state in the United States has the sightings of Bigfoot except Hawaii. All the states in the United States, think about that. Every state in the United States has stories and reports of Bigfoot. I even like to go to Connecticut and they say, hey, you guys, grab my sneakers and run to the store. I just love the way people talk, and I watch people's mannerisms. All that doesn't make me anything, but I'm very astute about watching someone, and I can proudly tell you that I can usually tell when a person's not being upfront or when they're ad-libbing. Not every single time, but I've become pretty good at watching and observing people, and I use that in my Bigfoot research. I tell people that I started out, my interest in Bigfoot started as a twofold happening. First, when I was about, I think I was 13, 1967, I was watching the news one evening with my father, just happened to come in. I didn't usually watch the news, and they had showed the film of the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot, or Patty they call her. And these men had supposedly filmed some unknown creature, and now it's world famous, the Patterson-Gimlin film. And it just struck me. I don't know, I stood there and I looked at that, and that just piqued my interest, and I thought, wow, that looks real. And I don't even think my dad was paying that much attention to it, but it just affixed me. And I think even that year in the big magazine called Argosy, if I'm not mistaken, it was a big, like Life magazine used to be back in the old days, a big full color photo spread, and I bought one of those and had all the still pictures in that video, and I was just hooked. I was just utterly amazed. And matter of fact, if I may speak about that, the Patterson-Gimlin film has, they say, is one of the most scrutinized and investigated pieces of video, other than the Zapruder film, which was John F. Kennedy got assassinated. Maybe the only film that's been more analyzed and more investigated, and second would be the Patterson-Gimlin film. From 1967 until today, it has been torn apart. It has been analyzed piece by piece and has never, now a lot of people will say they've heard it was proven a hoax. Never. It has never been proven by Kodak. And Disney World, who took this film and scrutinized it and broke it down and could find nothing wrong. The man who made the new movies, Planet of the Apes, not the Charlton Heston, but the newer movies, Planet of the Apes, said that if that was somebody who could make that outfit in 1967, he wished he could hire them, because they could not do that today. They couldn't replicate that suit today. And so I believe it is the most real piece of evidence, and it has withstood time and it has withstood scrutiny. Fast forward to when I was about 18 years old and had just started in the ministry for about a year. And this is an awesome story. I was in a church organization, and it was out of Louisville, Kentucky, and once a year they'd have an international convention of ministers, would come from all over the United States and 13 foreign countries, and it was a pretty big deal, and there'd be several thousand ministers together. And during that week of convention, we'd have a dinner one day of the week, and all the ministers would get together. But there was a guy there. I always looked forward to him being an 18-year-old impressionable young man. I was the youngest minister they had there. And there was a man that would come in. We were wearing suits and ties, okay? This guy come in, it was like Clint Eastwood. He had the buckskin jacket with the fringe hanging off of it. He had a cowboy hat. And this guy was from out in the Wyoming, Montana area out of there. And he was a minister to the Indian tribes. He was a guy born 100 years too late. He was all natural cowboy, and he dressed the way he dressed on the reservation and the way he dressed daily. It didn't matter if he was at this convention, and that just struck me. Here was a guy that tough, his face looked like worn leather, his cheeks looked like it was chiseled in stone, just that Clint Eastwood, tough Western, Louis L'Amour look. And this particular year, he sat at our table. And the guy, he killed grizzly bears. He hunted bears for a living. He hunted pelts. He would literally hunt moose and elk, and he would sell the pelts. And this guy, let me tell you this, this guy would leave on a Monday on a horse with mules and go up in the mountains and stay all week long living outside, not in a cabin, out under the stars. And he would hunt and come back like on a Friday or Saturday with all the pelts he had gathered, and that's what he did to make a living. And then he would preach to the Indians on Sunday and then head out again. When we sat at the table, the guys were asking, what's your latest story? What we was expecting a grizzly bear tale, or we was expecting some great rattlesnake he had while he was out hunting. He was a man full of stories, a plethora of stories. This particular time, as I'm sitting there, they asked him what he had been into or what had been unusual, and he said, I just experienced one of the most unusual things in my life. Well, I'm just drawn in. I'm listening to every word. And they said, what was it? He said, I believe I saw a Bigfoot. So I thought, oh my God, surely you're kidding. I mean, I saw the film when I was 13, and now, I've always thought about it. And this man literally tells this story. He's a minister, and he may have been about 58, 60 at the time. And so he begins to tell the story. He'd been up in the mountains, up on a mesa, kind of high up, and he had found him a place on the side of this mesa. He would crawl down into the rocks, and he could get settled in, and he would sit all day. He would sit for hours with a little canteen of water, and he would shoot down below. There was a 400-acre open field surrounded by woods, 400 yards wide and long. And he would wait for the animals to come out there, and he would shoot them. And after he got some down that evening, he'd go down and bring them up and skin them, eat some of the meat. That's how he lived off the land. And he had been doing this maybe 3 days, and he said, I had a place where I was hidden. I was not being seen. They had no idea I was there. It was a prime spot. Let me interject here. He's an expert marksman. If he shoots at it, it's hit. He was great. He didn't waste bullets. And when he shot to kill and got his animal. So on the third day, he's sitting up there in these rocks. He's hidden. He's up about 200 feet in the air, and he's comfortable that he's hidden. And he sees out of his peripheral vision something enters the field. So immediately his mind thinks, well, here's my next animal. And he says, as he looked down this great distance, 200 feet up and maybe 400 yards out, first thing he notices, this thing's walking upright. And he said, I thought, that's a gorilla. But there's not gorillas in Wyoming, Montana. I forget which state it was he was in. But he said, I thought, what in the world? And he said it walked out in the middle of the field and kept reaching down and pulling these plants out of the ground, and it would chew on the roots. And so he kept thinking, well, I can't see what it is. So he got his scope and brought it up. Now, this is unusual. You don't usually look through the scope unless he's going to kill something. But he was still trying to figure out, his mind's trying to understand what he's seeing. So he puts the animal in his scope. It's highly magnified, and he zooms in the face. And he said his heart just almost stopped beating because it was the body of a gorilla. It was a hair-covered, animalistic type body, but the face was completely that of a human. And he said, I uncocked the hammer because I knew I could not shoot it. I felt I would be committing murder. He said that then the strangest thing of all happened. Now I think, what's stranger than seeing a Bigfoot? And he said, I was hidden. There was no way this animal knew I was there, but it stopped. It sniffed the air and looked straight at me right into that scope. It detected me from 400 yards away and 200 feet up in the air. It looked straight into my scope. And he said it had the strangest look of awe and like shock. And he said, I just lowered the gun, and I stood there and said, what are you? To know the man, and like I said, he was a modern-day cowboy. He absolutely knows he saw a Bigfoot. I always tell people about my Bubba story. I was called to a home in eastern Kentucky. There's different people in eastern Kentucky. They are throwbacks to 50 years ago. And I'm going to say that even though they're poor, they are living their life the way they want to live it. And these people can make it. They can make it today better than you and I could because they know how to live rough and live off the land. But I was called to a Bubba, and this guy was 6'6". He had to weigh over 300 pounds, but he wasn't all fat. This was a monster of a man. His neck was big around the top of my leg. This guy, his head just sit on his shoulders like he could have been a Bigfoot. He had his bibbed overalls on, which they wear all the time. And they introduced me to Bubba. And I look up at this guy. I'm 5'9". I look up at this guy, monster man. He shakes my hand. I mean, he grips my hand. His hand covers my entire hand. I want you to get the enormousness of this. This guy was huge, okay? And so he said, I'm going to talk to you about Bigfoot, but you better not laugh at me. And I said, no, sir. I'm not going to laugh at you. So he sits down and begins to tell me. Now, he's got a hunting property. Let's talk about deer hunting. They take it seriously here in Kentucky. Listen, some of you people may not understand this. Listen, they will fight you if you go on their hunting property. They'll shoot at you, some of them. They get a hunting property and they work the ground and they plant certain foods and they plant certain rye and barley and they'll clover and stuff that will make the deer's antlers grow faster, and they get these big trophy racks, which is what these guys are after. And you don't go on their hunting property. That's their family, and I've heard of them fighting, and I hate to say it, they'll shoot at people. You got to get how serious they are about their hunting property. So this guy said, we have our family hunting property. We have marked our deers. We've got great antler growth. And he said, I was going after a trophy buck that we had been seeing on our property. And he said, this particular day I was up in my deer stand, and he said, I'm a pretty good shot. He's got a 30-06 rifle. Now, that's a very powerful gun, one of the most powerful rifles you could have to hunt with, and it stopped things a whole lot bigger than a deer. And but it's the sure gun to have with you. So he hears a noise coming through the woods. He hears crashing. His first thought is, that's kind of loud for a deer, but maybe it's a big buck deer in rut. Maybe he's in heat. It's that time of the year, and when they're in rut, they're looking for a mate, and they just get crazy. Deers get sometimes do unusual things. So he's waiting. He raises his gun up to his shoulder and thinking any minute this big buck deer is going to step out. And this big man's telling me this story, and I begin to see him shake. I watch he begins to wring his hands while he's telling me this story. Little things I'm noticing that tells me this man's being affected by this story, and he's telling me the truth. And so he said, all of a sudden, out of the woods, and this is said a lot when I'm in Bigfooting, if you don't hear bear, you hear gorilla. Now, there is an occasional bear here in western Kentucky and eastern Kentucky. They're a little more, there's more of them, a little more population. But we do not have gorillas. People see gorillas on TV, zoo, but that's what they say. And this man, sure enough, said, outstepped a gorilla. And he said this thing was 7.5 feet tall. It had to weigh 600 pounds or more. He said it was just taking his hand and breaking and snapping off these sapling trees as it was walking through and making room. It would raise its hand up and move the limbs at about 8 and 9 feet above it, just moving the limbs out of the way. And he said it stopped dead in its tracks and remained motionless. He said, my legs are shaky, my knees are shaky. I'm thinking, what is this gorilla doing in our hunting property? And he said he raised the scope and looked through the scope. And I watched how this is similar to the other story. And he said, I saw the face of what looked like a human being. He said it had a flat hooded nose. It had a very wide set of lips. It didn't open its mouth, but its lips, a huge jaw. It had a brow ridge over its eyes, kind of like a gorilla has, and had a sloping forehead that was kind of bald of hair and went back into a cone-shaped head. All these are signs that we relate to Bigfoot. He then says to me, he says, don't you laugh at me, preacher, but he said, I wet my pants. Now think about it. You got to understand people. This man's 6'6", 6'7" area. He's over 300 pounds. He's a monster of a man. And one thing that this guy has is pride. And he just told me that he wet his pants. I'm going to tell you something. That man's telling you the truth when he's going to admit something like that. But he admitted he was so in fear and so in shock that he lost control for a moment and wet himself. And he said, I thought, this is interesting, I thought, is my gun powerful enough to shoot this creature? He doubted that his 30-06, that's mind-blowing if you know anything about weapons, he doubted that his gun might not be strong enough, so he decided then, I will not shoot. He said the creature looked around like it was aware something was there and then took off in the direction it came. Back through the woods, he could hear it crash and everything. He came out of the deer stand. He left the deer hunting and came home. And he looked me in the eyes and said, I will never go back and hunt there ever again. Being a minister, being a preacher, I deal with religious people, Christian people in churches. And so here in Kentucky, we have people that are what we call old-time Pentecostal holiness. Again, I hope the listening audience understands I'm not ever making fun. I'm just explaining. There are Baptists and Methodists and many different kinds of religions, and that's awesome. Here in Kentucky and other states, we have people called Pentecostal holiness people. Now, this is not to make fun. These people are old-time holiness. In other words, believe it or not, they don't believe in going to dances. If you're going to go to a dance, you're going to hell. If you go to the movie theater, these people walk a chalk line. They don't say shoot or heck or darn. That's major cussing to them. They don't do it. These people are straight as an arrow, and just the little ladies, they have the long dresses down to the floor, and they wear their hair. The little gray-haired grandmas have their hair up in a beehive hairdo, I call it, and they're just as honest and sweet and good. And let me tell you something. They believe very strict rules. You and I probably couldn't live by it, but they believe, and if they believe it, I'm not going to knock them. I've got an old saying that somebody's way of believing something's better than our way of believing nothing. And these people are very devout and honest in what they believe, and you've got to get that in your mind before I tell you the story. If they think that going to a dance or going to a movie is sinful, then they sure ain't going to tell you a lie. They believe the devil's going to come out of the ground and grab them and take them straight to hell. I was called to a home of an elderly Pentecostal holiness grandma, maybe 88, I believe at the time, maybe 89, very spry, very energetic for her age. And I came into her home, and just a typical good old country home, and she offered me a meal. I said, no, ma'am, I'm not here to eat, but that's country folks. They'll offer you a meal. They're going to feed you. So we stood and talked a few minutes. I said, well, now tell me about the incident you had. And she said, sir, I wouldn't lie about it. I wouldn't risk my soul to tell you a lie. But she said, I was standing at my kitchen sink, and I was looking out my back window here on this country property. She's out in the middle of nowhere, out in the country, very rural. And she said, I saw this large bear-looking creature on two legs will start walking across the back of my property. She said, I stopped and squinted my eyes and thought, what in the world? And she said, it never went to all fours like bears would usually do. She said, and as it walked, and I got a clear picture as it got in the center of my direct vision, she said, and that thing was on two legs and had two long arms. It spread its fingers out. You could see 5 fingers, very long hands and fingers. She said, and it turned its head and looked my direction. She said, when it turned, and she's standing there doing this, she's in front of me, it didn't turn at the neck. She said it turned at the waist and turned its whole body. Now, here again is another thing that us researchers, this is what we look for. We just kind of quietly observe. If somebody tells you Bigfoot turned its neck and looked, then we start having red flags, because Bigfoots are known. They can't turn their neck. Their neck is directly onto their body. Their head sits directly into, many people, it's like a football player that's got shoulder pads in their helmet. And if you've ever wore that, you don't turn your head very much. But a Bigfoot's head is straight into its shoulders. So when she's turned at the waist, she's got her legs straight forward, but she's turned at her waist to look. That's classic. That's one of the signs we look for. And this elderly 88, 89-year-old woman doesn't know to make this up to me. And she said, he turned at the waist and looked at me, and she said, son, when he looked at me, that was a human. She said, that was a human face. It had human characteristics. It looked like, what are you doing there looking at me? What are you? She said, and we both looked at each other in amazement. We were both puzzled. And she said, then it turned its head and just walked on off like it didn't matter. And she said, son, I'm telling you, my hand on the Bible, that's what I saw. And if you know these Pentecostal holiness people like I know, listen, that woman told me the truth. She literally, you may not believe it, and I may not believe it, but she literally believed that her soul would be at stake if she had told me a lie. And she would not lie about a Bigfoot to me. To the Indian chiefs in Oklahoma. I've spoken to loggers in upper state New York and in Michigan. I've spoken to park rangers in Florida. Not everybody is drunk, not everybody is high, and not everybody is crazy. They believe as much as me and you know, believe in the television. I mean, they absolutely live it. You know, so many people don't understand them and knock them. I don't. I respect them because I know you know, they live what they talk. They're like the Amish or like the Mennonite. They believe what they live. Recently, I spoke to an elderly gentleman that had been having things going on his property, and I said, well, you know, you're having probably Bigfoot activity. He said, what's that? I love that. This man's not prone to believe in Bigfoot. He's not trying. You know, if you want to see something bad enough, you'll see it. You know, and if you want to believe in something bad enough, sometimes our mind can play tricks on us. But your mind can't play a trick on you. It's a Bigfoot if you don't even know what a Bigfoot is. I believe it was last 2017, there was 2 new species of ape found in South America. I believe in Peru and Brazil. I'm close to right. I should have studied that more, but I know there were 2 new species. Now think about that. In today's times where we think we know everything, they literally found 2 new species of an ape that had never been seen by man, but there were stories that they existed in South America. And they had gathered evidence. They had set out some traps to gather hair and blood samples, and they had enough evidence that science said, okay, it's a real creature. Now let's get behind it and discover it and find it. And they found these new apes. It's an amazing world. We live in our cities. I live in a rural little country town in Kentucky. Our population is 400. Most people from big cities would say we're backwoods, and I even can leave here and go to the country where there's real country folks. I'm not country. I'm just rural. But people think they know what's going on in this world around them. But I'm telling you, I can leave my home tonight, and I probably will here momentarily, and I will go out into the woods, and I'll go into secluded spots here. I have a hunting spot that's in 3,000-acre tract of land. I have a 100-acre spot sitting right in the center. There's no houses, no barns, or no farms. It's nothing but woodland and old timber that's probably never been cut. It's just like the land when the pioneers first came to Kentucky. And people would be amazed when you just go out into the woods and go out into the country at night and sit down and have patience. And I don't hear something every time I go, Gio, but let me tell you something. I can go 3 nights a week. I go as often as I can, and I hear some pretty amazing and unbelievable things. There are things out there that people can scoff and laugh to say they don't believe, but if they would just go and sit and listen and know the sound of the woods. I know the sound of coyotes and foxes. I know the sound of a bobcat screaming. But when you can understand all those sounds and you sit there and you start hearing these other sounds that cannot be explained by a person who's in the know, and you hear this walking bipedal steps in the nighttime walking around you, when you see the eye shine, when you hear the whoop, you hear the howl, you hear the whistle, you hear the grunt, you know beyond a shadow of a doubt there's something out there that we don't understand and we want to know about.
Wow. I mean, I wonder how many different types of stories he gets. He's interviewed over 100 people who've claimed to have an experience or a Bigfoot sighting. And I just, Don, you got to come back and share more.
Yeah, I always kind of thought, almost like wrote off Bigfoot experiences. Like they're all sort of the same. You saw some spooky creature in the woods. But I never realized, like, the nuances, all the little things to look for, you know.
Like I didn't realize that they couldn't turn at the neck, that
I mean, I guess it makes sense. Like, if it's built like a gorilla or some other human-shaped thing that isn't developed like us, I guess it makes sense.
And I want to know, I am so desperate to know, what does everybody mean by a human face? Like, I think gorillas and monkeys, yeah, we share very similar features, but there's a distinct difference between a human face and a gorilla's face. So what features make it look like a human? That would be so scary for me.
Yeah. Yeah, just to see something slightly human.
I can't even imagine the feeling of encountering one of these in the woods, let alone your own property or property line.
Yeah, that is a really good segue into just something I want to share really quick. It's a actual I guess, pair of 911 calls, a homeowner spotted something. He noticed something strange was going on.
911, what are you reporting?
What you're hearing is an actual 911 call placed to the Kitsap County Sheriff's Department in Washington State. One night in 1996, a panicked homeowner noticed something out of the ordinary happening around his home.
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something. It looks like a man. I don't know what it was, just that it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently.
A few weeks earlier, the same caller requested assistance from the police after watching something brutally attack his dog.
911, what are you reporting? I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
Renowned Bigfoot researcher and author Ron Moorhead was able to identify and interview the caller. From his recollection to Moorhead, he witnessed his dog being thrown over a distance of 35 feet, clearing a 9-foot fence along the way. So when he starts seeing a large figure roaming around the trees near his house, he begins fearing for his own safety.
I don't know what it was. Whatever it is, it's running. I couldn't catch it if I was going to chase it. But whatever it was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside.
And then he gets a real good look at it.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Neal!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Oh, and the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big... real big person. That's all I can say.
Okay, but it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
So the caller was never publicly identified, and little else is known about what actually went on there. But from the sound of that guy's voice, he really saw something spooky.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to run into a 7-foot-tall person in the middle of the night, let alone a Bigfoot. I don't even know if I could have stood outside and stared at the creature. I would have ran indoors, locked everything, especially living out in the boonies. That'd be kind of nerve-wracking, just waiting for the police to show up when there's a wild creature right outside.
Yeah, just running into anybody, but being something super massive and, kind of looks like a bear, all black.
We don't know what they're capable of either.
Yeah.
If they do exist.
If they do exist. They're huge, though. They,
They're big things. If you haven't seen Harry and the Hendersons, go see Harry and the Hendersons.
Again, not a documentary. Yeah.
Not a documentary, but fun for the whole family.
Yeah, but there are a lot of, I guess I'll say quote unquote researchers and professional scientists that claim that the evidence that exists is largely fabricated, and there really isn't any concrete proof that there is such a creature out there.
There's just some giant mountain men walking around without their shoes on, leaving
Exactly.
their big old footprints.
But then other researchers state that, well, there are countless tracks. There are people make castings of these impressions left by these enormous bipedal creatures. And like Don said at the beginning of his story, he's found scat that he's sent to universities that they can identify. I mean, I get it as researchers. If you can, identify something like that, it only makes your system better to get more samples to make it smarter. But so when they get something and they can't identify it, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to do that for a living.
No, play with shit all day?
Analyze poop. But you really can't disprove people's encounters. It's kind of the same argument with aliens. I mean, are there some people out there that know a little more than what they want to share? Maybe Bigfoot is just a giant monkey-like creature that lives in the tree canopy, so we can't ever find them.
Maybe he's an interdimensional being.
Maybe he is an alien.
That only some people, they're more susceptible to encounter him. Maybe he is an alien, yeah, from another dimension.
Well, whether you believe that Bigfoot walks among us or there's just some freakishly large bears out in the woods, I think we can all agree nobody wants to come face to face with that creature.
But if you do have a creepy encounter with Bigfoot or any other cryptid, let us know. Hit us up on our website atthefire.com and submit your story.
And follow us on Twitter at _the_fire. It's a little long.
Yeah, if it's easier for you, just get at us on Twitter and we'll get in touch and get the process rolling for you to come share your story at the fire.
If you enjoyed today's episode, tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best way to help spread the good word about a podcast like ours.
Yeah, and if you feel like helping us out a little bit, take the time to give us a rating and a review on iTunes. We would sincerely appreciate it.
Or any of your favorite streaming sites, because guess what? We're on them all.
Thanks again for joining us this episode. We had a lot of fun. Thank you again, Don, for taking the time. As always, my name is Ben.
And I'm Really Bigfoot Jill.
And I'm Regular Foot Ben. See you next time.
At the fire. This episode's music was made possible by the following artists: Soft and Furious, Black Ant, 3 Chain Links, David Mumford, Luftrum, Summer, Kevin MacLeod, Neal Wickramasinghe, and you can find their music and more at freemusicarchive.org and freesound.org.
You're listening to the Screaming Pods Network.